Amendment passes. Mr. Goldstein, do you have a second amendment?
This amendment is to insert wording that does not exist in the current motion that Mr. Lander made. And this is about diversity. Arlington Public Schools has identified diversity as part of our vision statement and as a core value. Arlington County holds diversity as a valued aspect of our community. The recent South Arlington Working Group identified diversity as a top priority. 360 people petitioned for the school board to make demographic diversity a primary factor in the recent high school boundary revision process. Over 1,500 people signed on to a petition initiated by a student in support of socioeconomic diversity. Students, including our own Student Activities Board, spoke directly to the school board about the importance of diversity and the impact it has had on their lives and their education, and students spoke directly to the school board to share with them the negative impacts that the lack of diversity has had on their personal educational experiences. As a value held by our greater community and by our school community, the school board is compelled to uphold diversity in word and action, in policy and in implementation. But diversity cannot be mistaken for inclusivity. Both Arlington County and APS tout being diverse and inclusive, yet we're not an inclusive community, indicated by the demographics of most of our schools, our housing patterns, and as we hear from the advocacy of our special education parent groups. Twice in the last 6 months, APS has been singled out as a public school system with segregated schools by the Washington Post in November 2016 and by the upcoming report from the Center for American Progress. This should be a call to action for a community that's so vociferously hails its diversity and proudly proclaims how diverse and inclusive it is. And yet, outside of our vision statement and core values, APS's definable steps to achieve diversity are scarce. Rationalizing the situation by explaining how APS provides tremendous wraparound services, or that the school board does not establish housing policy, does not change the fact that we have segregated schools. We are paying the segregation tax by funding significant wraparound services where we have significantly concentrated needs. But wraparound services or not, our schools are economically segregated. Services are not the point. Segregation is the point. APS strives to serve the needs of the whole child, yet those needs cannot be met by keeping children of different means apart. 2/3 of our schools are economically segregated outliers. Free and reduced lunch rates at 2/3 of our schools are greater than 45% or less than 15%. Today's world necessitates the ability to understand, communicate, and work with a broad range of people people different from ourselves. Our students cannot learn or acquire these skills and abilities isolated from one another. Students in our socioeconomic outlier schools are not being prepared for these experiences, neither in our most concentrated upper-income schools nor in our most concentrated lower-income schools. Our students looking around their classrooms and seeing classmates, making friendships, understanding backgrounds, journeys, struggles, and aspirations of students different from themselves. It is our job as a school system to prepare students for the world they face, the world that is already waiting for them. To be clear, my intention is not to recreate crosstown busing that caused so much community disruption in the 70s. It is not to radically redraw neighborhood boundaries so that high-income and low-income neighborhoods are districted into the same schools, and it is not to wrestle with Arlington County government over housing patterns. We have other opportunities and tools to improve diversity, and this options and transfers policy is a prime tool. We have the ability to enhance diversity through options and transfers so that people can choose to attend a diverse school outside their neighborhood if it works better for them. For example, we can use the tool of transportation for a higher income family who chooses to attend a predominantly low income school that has a program that attracts them, or vice versa, provide transportation to make it more attractive for a lower-income family who chooses to attend a majority higher-income school. Implementation steps like these would be developed by staff and described in the PIP, but staff can't begin to figure out implementation steps until we have a policy that says it is our intention to do so, and that is the point of this amendment. Accordingly, in keeping with APS's mission to prepare students to be responsible and productive global citizens, APS's vision to be a diverse and inclusive school community, and APS's core value of diversity, I move that we insert the following sentence after the second paragraph in the proposed draft number 9 of School Board Policy 25-2.2, quote, "The implementation of this policy will include steps to enhance diversity across our option schools and through our neighborhood transfer practices," end quote.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Lander? Or is there some?
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Lander.
yeah. Mr. Goldstein and I have had this conversation on a number of occasions, and I disagree with him passionately and strongly. I think there's so many things wrong with this that it's frustrating because with your language it says the implementation of this policy will include steps to enhance diversity across our option schools and through our neighborhood and transfer process. What steps? And the first thing you mentioned was transportation. And you also mentioned that, in your example, that families of high income could choose schools where they were lower income. It's been my experience that families choose instructional programs, not how much money their neighbors make, to determine what is the best instructional journey for their children. And so I want to bring this back to instruction because it's important. Diversity has not been defined, and so when you say enhance diversity, you reference in your comments the social economic or economic difference between school A and school B. And I don't know how we go about doing that with parents having a means test. We are a public school system for the public good, and so our charge is to educate every child, each child, every day in every school. And so unless parents show up with a pay slip telling us how much they make, I don't know how we effectively do that. And what happens to a brilliant child whose family doesn't make much money, or to a family who makes an exorbitant amount of money whose child has dyslexia? Children should be treated as individuals. The color of their skin and how much money their parents make, to me, have no relevance in our charge to educate the whole child, every child. And so I reject this amendment, and the other conversations we've had are not for public consumption, but I do think that the diversity piece is something we can talk about at Starbucks.
Are there additional comments on this motion? Ms. Talento, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, I would like to comment. While I support diversity, I think diversity is a great thing. It's very hard for me to sit here and listen to some of this because there are some things in here that I feel are microaggressions that I'm offended by. For instance, we are paying the segregation tax by funding significant wraparound services. So because I'm poor, I am a burden. That is very hard for me to swallow. I was poor, I was Latina, and still am, turns out, but I'm successful. Not quite sure how that happened. I think it was education with caring teachers who focused on instruction, not my socioeconomic class or the color of my skin or what my family looked like. And I recognize that we are legally not allowed to determine these things by race, but the truth of the matter here in Arlington, I can't speak for the rest of the country, is that the majority of our free and reduced lunch families are minorities. They are people of color. They are Latinos, African American, Eritrean, Ethiopian, Mongolian. There are so many other different races here, but the two races that are generally oppressed and are at the bottom of our achievement gap are African American and Latino students. And while I support diversity, I think that it is a conversation that has to be had with all the communities affected. The other thing that was frustrating for me to hear was that, for example, we can use the tool of transportation for a higher income family who chooses to attend a predominantly low income school that has a program that attracts them. Yet, when you do the vice versa, you state, provide transportation to make more attractive for a lower income family who chooses to attend a majority high income school. Where is the part that says with a program that attracts them? So should I assume that because I'm poor, I'm attracted to a school with higher income because they're higher income? And I recognize that these are emotional statements, but challenging conversations happen when you talk about race and social class, and that's what this is. And so policy is a framework and a foundation to implement a goal in government. Our goal for Arlington Public Schools is to provide an excellent, high-quality education to every single student that walks through our doors, regardless of gender, sex, race, immigration status, regardless of anything. They are a child, we educate them. And so my goal in developing policy is to ensure that every single student has an excellent education. I will support diversity. I think diversity is a beautiful thing. I was blessed enough to experience diversity, and I was blessed enough to be a token Latina, a token female, a token exception, because statistically speaking, I shouldn't be here. That being said, I want us to have this conversation in our community. I would support providing some type of diversity language in policy. However, saying something that the implementation policy will include steps to enhance diversity in our option schools and through our transfer practices has some concern for me, because our society is still working on having these challenging conversations on race. And I can't guarantee that there will always be the token Latina or the token African American on the school board or on the county board for that matter. And so if we have a board that doesn't understand these challenges or that has access to our communities who are truly representative of the free and reduced lunch statistics that we use in our policy and decision making, then I would be concerned that types of busing would be implemented that would not really support all of our families' needs or provide a voice at the table for them. So I'm happy to have this conversation with the community. I'm happy to bring this conversation back with community input representative of all of our community members and socioeconomic classes, and recognize that it is a conversation about race and class, and then discuss implementing something that does not define and provide open doors for potentially dangerous policy implementation in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I am supporting this motion for a very simple reason, and it's something that I've been articulating all along as we've been working on this policy, which is we need to have in our policy, the school board passed piece of this, the language that provides enough guidance so that our implementation, the PIP, will do what the school board's intention is. Right now, we are doing this in a number of ways. We have a lottery at HB that provides different access across all of our different elementary school districts. It's not a particularly successful diversity policy, as it turns out, but that is the intent of that approach, and I know we're going to be looking at that over the course of the summer and fall and discussing. We have guaranteed access for ATS through the VPI program. These are steps that are taken to enhance diversity, and we need to have in our policy the guidance that supports what we're actually doing. It's as simple as that. This also, we're talking about wanting to go to a super lottery where everyone, or some version of it where, there's an opt-out or immediate access in, and then you can decide whether you want some of our option schools. This supports doing that. And on top of that, of course, we have community, we've heard from people all over the community that there is interest in enhancing diversity. This does not force any particular approaches that might be burdensome, that might be costly. This is an opportunity to take some of those steps, and without dictating or prescribing anything that might be too costly or difficult. So I am supporting this motion. I will say I think it's very important as we think about this that, tonight we are working on a policy, and that's what we need to be looking at when we make this vote. I, like my colleagues, disagreed with, some of my friend Mr. Goldstein's preamble. I believe services matter very much. I believe every school, every one of us up here has been to every elementary school, every middle school, every high school. There's not a one that you can walk into and not see tremendous learning happening, tremendous engagement, smart kids, successful students, every single school. We do have a wide range of demographics and diversity indicators across our schools, but I simply will not accept anyone's argument, including people at our board table, who imply that at any of our schools we are not serving our students as well as we possibly can. We are. So I don't accept the logic of the preamble, but I am going to support the motion because, again, I believe it's appropriate for the policy we're building.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to make my comments now. From a process perspective, I'm not going to approve this motion. We worked on this policy revision since the beginning of the year. We had 9 drafts of the policy. There were months and months and months in which this concept could have been introduced to the policy. It could have been brought forward, it could have been discussed in the community, and it was not. Yet at the 11th hour, it's brought to the table a significant policy comment that is extremely complicated and deserves conversation, and it's brought at the final hour. I would have welcomed this conversation in the community, in the drafts, so we could have determined whether or not this wording, the intent, is something we wanted to do. So on simply the process piece, I don't think, if we haven't had enough conversation about siblings, if we haven't had enough conversation about lotteries, which have all been out there for months and we've had discussion on, this cannot come forward at this point and expect to be passed by the board. That's my position, because I think we should stick to that process. I can give you a foreshadowing of my future thoughts on this regarding diversity. Again, I think diversity is an extremely complex issue. I've spent much of my life studying diversity. I've traveled and lived in many, many different countries. I've lived in the wealthiest places and the poorest places. And the one thing that I have come to value is everybody's differences. Rich, poor, different colors, different languages. Everything has its strength. And I don't think any one is better than another. They're just plain different. And their different strengths are derived in different areas. Communities build themselves, whether they're rich or poor, different ethnic groups, different racial groups. People build community. And I'm very concerned when we talk about implementation of this policy and steps to enhance diversity. That says to me that we are taking active steps to make that happen. And I would want to make sure that if we're going to do that, that those steps, those actual steps, are steps the community would want to take. And I am not convinced that this community wants to do that. We have great schools. Every one of our schools is a great school. People pick the community that they're in. They're happy in their schools. They're successful in their schools. Those are choices people have made. I have no problem with an options policy in which people can then opt to go somewhere. We have that option. We have communities. We have option schools. We already have the option to go to a different place. And as a matter of fact, in one of the option schools, when people have that choice, it still ends up being a predominantly majority white school. So my point here is I believe in giving people options, which is exactly what this policy is doing, which is exactly what these option schools have done since they were put into place in the 90s. I support that, but I don't believe in either forcing diversity. I don't believe in doing that, and I don't see a single step that you addressed that isn't getting very close to that, or so incentivizing it that in a sense it's doing that. So I'm simply not comfortable, and it's going to take me a lot of conversation with our community to get to that point, because I fully support people choosing, opting to pursue a different community to be in, to have their students be a part in, but I don't believe that it's our responsibility to make that happen at this point. I think that our responsibility is to provide the best education at every single school, in every single neighborhood, for every single student, regardless of their ability. And that's for students with disabilities, it's for second language learners, it's for every type of student. That is my primary responsibility. We then have option schools for people to exercise that option, and I think in that way, we support and promote people choosing that option, and I think that's enough. So that's a preview of where I'll be when we get to that. Happy to have the community conversation, but right now, I think this needed a lot more conversation before it became an addition to this policy.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. I just want to address the process point. I did bring this up at one of our earliest, or the earliest work session, and there was not a majority of board members who wanted to build this into staff's work on adjusting the policy as it went forward, and that's why we don't see it. We did not see it through successive drafts. But I think it's important, and that's why I brought it up today at the board table. Again, thank you all for your thoughts.
I'd also like to make a factual correction. The Center for American Progress does not find the Arlington Public Schools to be segregated. That is a factual correction I need to make, and I could have that substantiated by staff because they've been working with that organization to clarify that. There was some old, outdated historical information. They were basing a previous edition of their paper, and it is now, we are not a segregated school system in their report. Is that not the case?
That's correct. They sent us an update and said they were not listed in their report.
Okay, and that report has not come out yet, right?
That's correct, but the writer of the report, who I had been working with, sent me an email that said that they had reevaluated the data and we were no longer, they had made some errors in their data calculations and we were not on the list.
Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and vote on this, on the motion. Did you want to read just the wording again, not the entire motion,
You don't want me to
please?
read the whole 4 pages again?
Not unless you want more comments again.
I think that would be useful for the public debate. But I will read.
For the sake of time.
That we insert the following sentence after the second paragraph in the proposed draft. Number 9.
Finish this, yeah.
Quote, "The implementation of this policy will include steps to enhance diversity across our option schools and through our neighborhood transfer practices." And it's up there on the board.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Nay.
Nay.
The motion fails 3-2. All righty, now we'll bring back the